Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 17 edition, and the final installment of calendar year 2023. So before we get into all the games themselves, I want to thank all of you guys and girls out there, the loyal Bet the Board listeners that have been with us since the start of the calendar year. Bigger things ahead and on the horizon for this very podcast. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, this is a little bit of uncharted territory for us. We're sweating an actual college football bowl game as we're talking NFL football here on a Thursday morning.
Today's been a little bit of a mixed bag.
Clusterfuck.
Number one.
This is why you don't do watch-alongs. Let's put it that way, and I'll leave it at that.
I don't typically watch games, but the first thing is full-blown circus over on my end. AC went out on dog duty. It's getting fixed as we're recording this, so that's going on. I also didn't know there was big things on the horizon for Bet the Board next year, but I will take your word for it. And then this is also the last.
Just more shows. Nothing too crazy and exciting.
Maybe.
It's just more shows. Is this an unofficial Payne Insider retirement show that I don't know about?
Last one of 2023. It's the last podcast, going out on a high note. So other than that, that's what we're doing here. But okay, I feel like we want to fire this up. Let's make this as concise as possible. Let's get some good information out there. Let's start this thing. You lead the way.
Yep. Let's talk some ball. And we'll start on Thursday night with the Jets on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland, a 7.5-point favorite across the board. Total on this game as low as 34. There are some 34.5s. This number did come down from 36 at the top of the market. When we look at the matchup here, it's a Cleveland team that leads the NFL in total defense against the Jets offense that's last in that particular department. When we look at the Cleveland Browns seeking their second 11-win season under head coach Kevin Stefanski, he'd become the first Cleveland Browns head coach with multiple 11-win seasons since Paul Brown accomplished the feat back in the early 1950s. I mean, this has been a pretty impressive team. We knew that the defense was going to be their calling card. They're on their fourth starting quarterback. Joe Flacco has gone from 150-1 to be comeback player of the year, now mentioned as a co-favorite alongside Damar Hamlin. It has been one of the more remarkable stories that we have seen. However, for the Cleveland Browns, you're going to want to keep tabs on the injury report. As of this morning, per report from Tom Pelissero, things were not trending positively towards the 200-yard man in Amari Cooper that tormented the Houston Texans last week. And despite the Jets' futility from an offensive side, you do need all hands on deck to be able to attack this defense. So, Payne, when you look at a game like this where we know Trevor Siemian and the Jets are limited offensively, probably not going to do a whole hell of a lot, rinse and repeat for that team, is there a particular matchup that you're looking to watch, whether it be the Browns offense against the Jets defense or to see how Trevor Siemian and the Jets offense with Breece Hall can move the football against this Cleveland stout defensive front?
I think that's interesting too, because we know Amari Cooper is tough as nails. He's played injured his entire life, it seems, and he was clamoring to go back in the ball game there to get that record. So a little
There may not, by the way, be a more underappreciated wide receiver in the NFL over the last decade than Amari Cooper. I'd actually put him up there in the same breath as Mike Evans. Guys that just go out there and produce. They don't get the headlines like CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson. They don't yell and scream about not getting the ball if they're not focused a particular week. They go out there and produce week in, week out. It's pretty impressive.
Even at his age, Mike Evans is going to get paid because he showed he could do it with Baker Mayfield. And kudos to him for what that contract's going to be. In terms of the matchup, I think it's the obvious, right? You want to go good on good with Flacco, who's really given the Browns offense a shot of energy. And I think Kevin Stefanski has molded his system to a quarterback who complete inverse of every other quarterback that's taken snaps for Cleveland this season. So honestly, for me, like if the Browns somehow win the North Division, they're likely to make the playoffs. Like to me, the coach of the year seems pretty obvious if you start going through the list of injuries that the Browns have endured this season. And then again, thinking about the past quarterbacks on this roster with Deshaun Watson and DTR and PJ Walker and their style relative to what Joe Flacco is. But again, kind of going back to this matchup, we've seen Kevin Stefanski kind of spam the pass button with Joe Flacco. If you look at Cleveland's pass rate over expectation, it's pretty much soared. And, this is certainly a great story. I just get the vibe it's going to be much tougher tonight. You look at the 4-game stretch, Jets are far and away the toughest defense Flacco's faced. What he's seen so far is a fringe bottom 10 defense in the Rams. You have the downtrending Jaguar defense that's dead last in passing success rate allowed since I believe it was week 9. You have a Bears defense that no doubt has made some serious strides, but the weaker part of the unit is still defending the throw game. And then you have a bottom 5 Texans pass defense last week that was, just that unit in general was littered with some injuries. And now you get a Jets defense that's continuing to play hard despite the season being lost. It's a top 5 defense in efficiency. They've faced a top 5 schedule of offenses. So this is a pretty big step up here. I would think on a short week, Stefanski's biggest mission is figuring out how to protect the tackle situation. If you look at the Browns O-line, certainly have navigated the injuries there pretty well this season, better than you could expect. And the interior health has certainly gotten better with Bitonio and Posick and Teller. But what they have at tackle with Christian and Hudson, the Jets just do a fantastic job getting pressure without blitzing. 31st in blitz rate, top 5 in pressure rate. The Jets back end is rarely getting exposed. And then, if somehow Cooper is going at less than 100%, you got Sauce out there. So maybe you kind of joked about this before the podcast, the Elijah Moore revenge game. Certainly that's going to be a weapon. I would think attacking the middle of the field, that's really where you want to give the Jets some of their trouble. And I think Flacco, just the veteran he is, he understands what he has with David Njoku. Some of the other guys haven't. When he signed that big contract, it was based on more potential than what he had been producing. But now all of a sudden, he's become the focal point of this offense. 28% target rate when running a route. The Jets are 26th in targets allowed to the tight end position. 8 touchdowns allowed to tight end. So you're going to fire up Njoku. You're going to get Elijah Moore running in the slot in this, revenge type game. I think the key, though, you think about the Flacco, you think about the Browns in general, their offense. I think the goal tonight is stay patient. Maybe you are not spamming the pass button as much. And I understand, right, the Jets have been pretty good against the run. But Flacco's got 7 interceptions in 4 games for as good as he's been. 6 of those 7 have been deemed turnover worthy. So effectively on him, right? Flacco's fault. This is not a spot, unless you're trailing somehow, where Flacco needs to take unnecessary risks. No, and you got your number 1 defense back at home where it's most comfortable. Ward is back healthy, and they're stepping down in class strength-wise while also going against, a 4th-string quarterback here. And I think that's the path. I think that's why you're seeing this total dip a little bit, even though Cleveland's been spamming the pass button. I think that the approach might be a little bit more conservative tonight, just thinking about what the Jets are offensively in that matchup against their defense.
I'm with you in that. I know we say this all the time, that a punt's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it definitely rings true in a game like this, that if you're going to force the Jets to consistently drive the football rather than being able to create a short field or allowing the defense to create a spark, much like they did in the first half last week against the Washington Commanders, it's going to be an uphill battle for them when you look at the way that the Jets really didn't do much of anything last week offensively. Mounted 1 drive in the second half, and that, of course, got them the game-winning field goal after they squandered a 20-plus point lead. All the things you said about Sauce Gardner, he's going to have to borrow the trademark from Darrelle Revis, given what he's done this season, and take over an island somewhere in Manhattan. I mean, according to Pro Football Focus, Gardner's been targeted a grand total of 44 times this season. To put in perspective, for as good as the Browns' defense has been, all of their top corners targeted 60-plus times. So teams just eliminating one part of the field, and that task gets only that much more daunting if Amari Cooper can't go and be able to stretch the field with the deep ball component.
Not a lot of land left in Manhattan, I'm told.
No, he's going to have to try and do some negotiating. And look, he may get 200 square feet that's worth $7.8 million. So he's going to have to do everything he can to get his hands on all of that. But should be a defensive struggle tonight for the final Thursday night football game of the NFL season. On to Saturday night, Payne, on December 30th, where the Dallas Cowboys will play host to the Detroit Lions. The Cowboys come into this game riding their first losing streak of the entire season, coming up just short last week in South Florida against the Miami Dolphins. It's the Cowboys, now a 5.5-point favorite, total of 53.5 on this game. When we started early this morning, kind of figuring out some of the details, 6 is painted across the board. That number no longer available, and we have seen the total tick up a little bit from where it opened, 51.5 on Sunday, but as low as 50.5 last week on the look-ahead line. The Lions, well, they'll host their first playoff game since 1993, division champions, much to our chagrin, beating the Minnesota Vikings last week by 6 points. They'll snap the second longest active drought without a division title. The Cleveland Browns now own that record. And we know one very proud listener of this very fine podcast, Payne, a diehard Detroit Lions fan, was not happy with our best bet choice against them. I'm sure he is relishing that division title. When we look at the Cowboys, this team, when you try and figure them out, has been as straightforward as home versus road. 15-game home winning streak, the second longest in team history. They're the first team ever with 30-plus points in each of their first 7 home games. You look at their point differential, plus 167 at home, 7th best since the merger. Not so great on the road, where they've been outscored by 6 points. And you look at some of the combined scores for their home games, 63, 66, 55, 76, and most recently a 46 against the Eagles. Mike McCarthy, some interesting comments, didn't want to really pass blame in the loss against the Dolphins, said they could use that to build a little bit of confidence. But Payne, when we look at a game like this, the Lions not exactly familiar with this level of success. You always worry about a level of complacency. So when we look at Detroit on the offensive side, matched up against the Cowboys defense, favorable matchup for Jared Goff, or will he have his hands full, especially if the Lions have to go to battle without their left tackle and Taylor
Little
Decker?
Gus there, Rome. You won't get the tin cup reference there, but the wind started kicking up there as that gentleman lined up for his kick. Let me ask you this question.
You made a call. You cranked up the fans. I got you.
Okay. Not on this podcast.
Focus, Payne.
You focus.
Focus.
So, what did you make of last week's Lions game?
That the Minnesota Vikings were the better football team, that if Nick Mullins doesn't throw a duck, despite everyone on social media wanting to crucify him for not throwing to Brandon Powell in the check down, that Jordan Jefferson has the ball first and goal. And if the Vikings play the entire second half with Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson out there, they win that football game in a track meet. So that was kind of my 2-minute handicap. Turnovers did him in, but Nick Mullins still threw for 400 yards, exactly the way we drew it up against the Lions secondary that leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to covering that deep ball.
Yeah, listen, you tip your cap to the Lions for winning their division. Was the first time since 1993, and it obviously came at our expense. And
before your lifetime even started back in 93.
Theoretically, you'd think this is a down spot for the Lions, right? They've accomplished something they haven't done in 30 years. Well, getting the Cowboys, at a depressed price off back-to-back losses, and now they're back home in the Dome. And I got the same vibe as you. Right, and that's the one thing you have to do as a sports bettor is kind of remove yourself from the scoreboard and truly dig in. And I left the Lions game last week with the same feeling I had going in, that, Detroit is somewhere between 8 and 11 in our power ratings all season. And maybe that changes if you get a little bit healthier in the secondary. It's still not that upper echelon team, despite everyone hoping they can be because they love a good underdog story. So it's like, we take the Vikings plus 3.5 in that game. It closes 2.5 flat. On game day, the one group that's had the most success this season is ramming and jamming the Vikings money line. So I think, to your point, like, number one, we did our job with the line move. But then you just see how that game plays out. And it's not just Jordan Addison and leaving with an ankle injury in the second quarter, and TJ Hawkinson tearing his knee the first pitch.
DJ Wanham on the defensive side of the ball.
But you think about 2 of the Vikings' top 3 weapons are out, and they're the 2 players that are attacking the Lions' secondary where they're most vulnerable, right? It's the slot, and it's their linebackers with the tight end. So, 2 of the largest matchup advantages are gone. And on top of that, the Lions spammed late downs again. 57% success rate on 3rd and 4th down. The Vikings were 30%. Lions +3 in turnovers. Lions win the coin flip call that resulted in the 10-point swing there on the Goff turnover that got returned for a touchdown that eventually got called back, and they kicked a field goal. Was the ball moving before? Whatever it is, right? I'm just surprised. But my point here is like the same one as you, is like Minnesota, with all of that happening to them, with its third-string quarterbacks driving late to win the game outright, and then, the pea shooter arm we said Nick Mullins had throws the flutter ball, stepping into a clean pocket and targeting a wide-open Justin Jefferson. It's picked inside the 5. So kind of where I'm going with this is, like, I didn't bump the Lions rating up at all. I wasn't impressed with the Lions. Detroit was outgained by 2.5 yards per play. And saying that, I got a weird feeling they were going to get hit. And it's because some of the matchup advantages they have on offense. And I think if you don't get a sleepy Lions team after, accomplishing something they haven't done in like 4 decades, I think the Lions find offensive success if they can keep Goff upright. I think we talked off air a little bit. Taylor Decker found his way onto the injury report yesterday after being limited the day prior. And you got to monitor that, because a DNP on Wednesday usually doesn't mean much, but this is a Saturday game. So theoretically, yesterday is a Thursday when thinking about it in the injury timeline context. We know Goff has massive splits when pressured versus being kept clean, and the Cowboys are number 1 in the NFL in both pass rush win rate and pressure rate. Goff is 28th out of 42 qualifiers in turnover-worthy play rate when pressured. Yards per pass attempt decreased 1.7 yards, so he's not that type of quarterback to attack the attacker. You typically kind of see him go cocoon mode and like throw while trying not to get hit, and his passer rating dips a whopping 51 points. Now, there's certainly a game state which can negate some of that Cowboys pressure, right? A neutral state where the Lions are leaning on its ground game. And we think about things we've talked about with Dallas the last couple weeks in these big game breakdowns, is the big fella Hankins is still out for the Cowboys. And since week 9, the Cowboys defense allowed 45% of runs to great success. Well, it's 31st in the NFL. You got that Montgomery-Gibbs duo, which is hyper efficient. Both those guys top 8 among qualifying running backs in total EPA. We know the Cowboys live in man coverage. So a lot of those quick passes, the wide receiver screens, the crossers the Lions love to employ, I think will work if Goff has time. Dan Quinn's going to have to figure out how to protect the middle of the field. You brought something up to me a few weeks ago, and I'd kind of seen it, but didn't really know how deficient they were until you look at the data. And so I dug in for this specific game at Jordan Lewis. They've moved him to slot corner this season. It's a guy who's been on the roster for a while, kind of was a key cog years ago, but he has not been good. He's graded at 135th out of 136 qualifying corners. Amon-Ra St. Brown lines up in the slot on 56% of passing snaps. So
that was like your class rank back in high school, 135 out of 136.
Well, had more kids. Fortunately, right? So if Goff is targeting the middle of the field with Amon-Ra and Laporta, and he's got time, I think he's going to find some success. Based on some of the pre-snap looks, teams don't target tight ends, as much as they should against Dallas. And we saw last week Dan Quinn did something pretty interesting with Micah Parsons, where he lined him up at middle linebacker at times, where it would kind of allow him to flow sideline to sideline and use his speed against Miami's, quicker backs. But you kind of put that threatening presence right in the quarterback's face, right in the middle. And so immediately, like, his mindset is going to be, I need to go wide. But when teams do target their tight end against the Cowboys, it's been wildly efficient. So I wouldn't be conned by that if you're Detroit and you see Micah lined up in the middle of the field. So I look at this side of the ball, Todd. It comes with variance. If the game state is neutral, if Goff is kept clean, if Detroit isn't sleepy, they can have some real success here offensively. I think the other side of the ball probably goes a long way in determining, the game state.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the other side of the ball, and this is a Lions defense that keeps thinking they're going to get a key cog back in the secondary and C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I'm not optimistic that he returns this week either for the team after not returning last week against the Vikings. And when we look at the Lions overall, this is a group that's allowed the 10th most passing yards on the season. We talked about it a little bit earlier, allowed 400-plus yards through the air against the Vikings and basically played an entire half without some of the top weapons. And this is a major step up in class for Detroit on the surface defensively. You look at the last 5 opponents that they faced, it's the Vikings, the Broncos, the Bears, the Saints, and no disrespect meant, but the Packers don't operate on the same level as the Cowboys at home. And as far as what this Lions team does, I mean, they've registered just 34 sacks on the season, but they do rank first in getting to the quarterback in terms of creating hurries. So we'll see if they're able to get Dak Prescott off his spot. But we can talk, Payne, all we want about Dak Prescott, about how Tony Pollard should have broken that ball outside against the Dolphins with the speed he has, CeeDee Lamb's potential for a massive day. But if the Cowboys don't have the building blocks up front, it could make things very difficult trying to slow down that Lions pass rush, giving Dak time to feast against a below-average secondary.
Yeah, I would concur there because I do think this is a Dak game. Right, I don't envision a ton of.
It has to be
just in general, right? Like you're not envisioning a ton of efficiency for Dallas the way Tony Pollard is running right now. You hate to say that, but like, man, we were just so high on him coming into the season. The best attribute he has is his speed, and he's not even confident in that getting to the edge. He's 38th in EPA per rush. The Lions are also top 5 in schedule adjusted defensive rush efficiency, so it's not a great matchup from that perspective. So you immediately think it's going to be a pass funnel type game for Dak, but you hit it perfectly in that you got to keep your eyes on the offensive line health for the Cowboys. Both Zach Martin and Tyron Smith are dinged up, and so I think that probably is the dictator in where this line goes next. We're starting to see that leak down a little bit, but you do have to think in general Dallas finds themselves in a little bit more of a comfortable situation, right? They're back at home. They're in the dome on the turf. This isn't Buffalo with weather or South Beach with this wet grass surface. But even in those situations, right, just because the scoreboard showed the Cowboys only scored 20 last week, they fumbled at the Miami one. Down to down, finished 7th best offense of the week. So now all of a sudden, again, you're in this comfortable environment. Dallas is stepping down in class. I mean, Detroit, again, just give up 7.5 yards per play to a third-string quarterback with 2 of the top 3 weapons out for a large sample of that game. And you start...
Third string, fourth string, we're splitting
whatever it is.
With Nick Mullins.
I think if he wasn't on IR, they might not... You know what I'm saying?
They don't get Dobbs.
Yeah. You also look at the quarterbacks the Lions have faced since week 8. It's Nick Mullins, right? It's the newly benched Russell Wilson. It's Justin Fields twice. It's Derek Carr. It's a benched Jimmy G. It's an injured Justin Herbert. And that Chargers offense, even at its peak this season, played well below expectation. I think we can all agree on that. And the Chargers were the best offense over this stretch that the Lions faced. And they're one-dimensional. And you look at those numbers in that game, Detroit gave up 0.27 EPA per play, 4th worst mark of week 10 when they face each other. Herbert had a 62% success rate through the air. Dak will have some guys open here. Jake Ferguson has a nice matchup. The Lions are bottom 7 in the NFL in EPA allowed to the tight end position. We know McCarthy does a fantastic job moving CeeDee Lamb around. I would assume he's going to occupy the slot a little bit more, and maybe you don't move him around as much. Receivers have just been torching the Lions secondary, especially the best ones in the league. And go down this list, right? Keenan Allen, Justin Jefferson, Olave, DJ Moore, all crushed in recent weeks against the Lions. And then you think about that schedule of offenses and quarterbacks I just ripped off there. Somehow the Lions are 27th in EPA per dropback allowed since week 8. So Dallas is going to find some offensive success here, especially if they can keep Dak upright. They need to score here to help their defense, right? Build that lead, force the Lions to play from behind, remove that neutral game state. I'm interested to see where this goes. And we talked off air, and I was like, hey, I think all of the indicators are saying this line's going to dip below the 6. And sure enough, as we started recording, the Lions took some money. And again, I think it's very much predicated on some of those offensive line injuries for the Cowboys.
Lions have been an interesting team when you look at the betting market. We, of course, were on the Minnesota Vikings last week, gave out the 3.5 number, saw no resistance at 3, and you even had some sharp guys looking to try and piggyback that at lesser numbers that were out there. And the week before against the Broncos, I mean, I know we were on the Lions, we laid it, but, leading up to game day, I mean, there were some respected opinions that were on the other side of that game. So when you talk about a defense that hasn't exactly been a brick wall where there is a high level of outcome that you can get from them, you understand why why you see some wild swings on a lot of Lions games. Should be a fun one Saturday night with plenty of offense in prime time. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. Be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, when we look at the Sunday slate, a little bit surprising that this game wasn't flexed into the New Year's Eve time slot, given the implications for the AFC, but it might have been a lot for the Baltimore Ravens, although who knows? They might have preferred having an extra 6 to 8 hours, given the quick turnaround from Monday Night Football to an early game on Sunday, to welcome in the Miami Dolphins. This game was 3 on the look-ahead number, reopened 4. That number didn't last. We're now down to kind of 3 across the board. There are some 3.5s if you happen to be leaning towards the Miami Dolphins. Total in the game, 47. And both teams come into this spot, as I mentioned, off of big wins last week. The Dolphins at the Bell knock off the first team with a 500 record. The Ravens winning outright at San Francisco, forcing Brock Purdy into 47 turnovers and moving him from front-runner for the MVP into prohibitive long shot, relatively speaking. The Dolphins, number 1 scoring offense versus the Ravens' number 1 scoring defense. Should be fun to watch. Dolphins are on pace to lead the NFL in scoring offense and total offense for the 3rd time in team history. Haven't done so since 1984. Meanwhile, the Ravens are on pace to be the first team in NFL history to lead the league in scoring, defense, takeaways, and sacks. And credit to the Ravens, nothing that they've done this year is fluke-like. Most time leading through 15 games since the 2007 New England Patriots, can become the 3rd team since 1970 to lead in the final 2 minutes of every game since the 1972 Dolphins and 2007 Patriots, and their point differential of plus 148 versus winning teams would tie the best in NFL history, a mark that has stood since the Vikings accomplished the feat back in 1969. So Payne, clearly one of the most fascinating matchups on both sides of the ball, so I'll leave it up to you. Dolphins offense against the Ravens defense, or Ravens offense against the Dolphins stop unit?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting game. I think we can kind of start with not just the Ravens on offense, but maybe how they're being viewed a little bit this week. Now, not going to bury the lead here. We've seen a respected group take the 4 on the Dolphins Monday, right? And then another group was willing to grab 3.5 Wednesday, and then we kind of just saw this trickle down towards a 3 flat before we recorded. And I don't believe the Dolphins defense is as good as some of their trending metrics suggest. Part of the resurgence is getting Jalen Ramsey back. Xavier Howard returned last week. Deshaun Elliott returned last week. Javon Holland is trending well this week, and we know what he means at that safety position where you can kind of move him around on the chessboard, and that's pretty vital, I think, in a spot like this where you're trying to contain Lamar's legs as he starts to run a little bit more in crunch time of the season. But the pass rush has kicked up a note, right? That's Jalen Phillips was the guy everyone loved along that D-line, and it just seems like they're playing for him, playing for a little bit of a higher cause right now. But Vic Fangio, you think about this, has sent the blitz on just 20% of dropbacks this season. That's the 5th lowest rate in the league. But Miami right now on the season, 3rd in pressure rate, number 1 in adjusted sack rate. So we talk about this all the time, is being able to get pressure without leaving yourself exposed on the back end. And we already know Vic Fangio's complex schemes in the secondary. But I think inherently, like, where the variance lies here is, like, first, the Dolphins are stepping up in class big time. Miami's faced the very easiest schedule of offenses. Now you get, a top 5 Baltimore offense. But also pressure is kind of what has helped Miami's defense surge, as I mentioned, but it's where Lamar's been at his best. Only Dak Prescott's graded up better under pressure. Lamar's legs allow him to kind of get out of these vulnerable spots and then open up the defense where he can attack. And so Lamar leads the NFL in big-time throws when pressured because of those legs. The key for this defensive line is to kind of maintain that integrity with the pass rush, keep Lamar in the pocket. Part of the sell this week comes with their offense, and we've seen in spots the Ravens offense look like an absolute juggernaut, especially at home. So you could look really stupid and get mud on your face, but I'm kind of willing to say what's being said behind the scenes. Brock Purdy lost the MVP race last week, okay? The way Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes have played really hasn't had them in the conversation this season, because we're all comparing those two to what they've done at their peak. There also wasn't anyone higher on Todd Monken in this Lamar Jackson duo than us coming into the season.
That is correct.
But suddenly Lamar Jackson's the leader of the MVP race, and we somehow forget he completed 58% of his passes against a horrific Jacksonville secondary 2 weeks ago, 55% of his passes against the Rams secondary, 56% of his passes against the freaking Charger secondary, right? The Bengals, 61%, the Browns, 56%.
Full-blown regression.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite literally Lamar's prior 5 games before the Ravens defense won the game for Baltimore last week against the 49ers. We went over Lamar Jackson's passing touchdowns this season at 23.5. He's unlikely to hit that number, and we're giving him the MVP. He's got a total of 24 touchdowns. Like, it's banana land to me. And so in combination...
His current pace, by the way, Payne, would be the fewest touchdown passes thrown by a quarterback given MVP if he does take home the
That's what I assumed. Interesting. I appreciate you stamping that. And like, you think about that, and then in combination with what we saw last week in terms of offensive performance by the Ravens, the first 10 points the Ravens scored took a grand total of 50 yards. That should have equated to about 3.2 points. After that, you've got a 44-yard touchdown drive, a 9-yard touchdown drive. This is also a short week game. Ravens played on the West Coast Monday night. We've seen the Ravens throw up stinkers all season long after big wins. You go through that schedule. Big division win on the road against the Bengals week 2. Lose to the Colts at home week 2. Big win on the road against the Browns. Lose to the Steelers. Crush the Lions at home. Don't meet expectation on the road the following week against Arizona, and that was just one of the more lethargic efforts. Dismantled the Seahawks. Lose the following week at home to the Browns. Beat the Bengals in primetime. Look lethargic against the Chargers. So I think that... yeesh. The old 3rd and 16.
Focus, Payne. Focus.
I think that is why you are seeing this Miami money enter the market. And again, it's not to, throw dirt on Lamar, because there's just no one who thought more of his situation in this offense coming into the season and have kind of been there the entire way. But that's kind of my thought process on the Baltimore Ravens sell this week on their offense in general. And that's, again, is even saying where, some of the numbers indicate to me that the Dolphins defense might even be a little overrated. But, I think you will ultimately get from professional bettors, as we've already seen the Dolphins. It wouldn't shock me to see a little under money here as well, right?
So when we look at the other side of the ball then, talking about the under, Baltimore played zone on 82% of its defensive snaps last week against the 49ers. It was the second highest rate of the season for the Ravens behind week 4 against the Browns. They were able to combine that with pressure up front, and we talked about some of the turnover issues that Brock Purdy struggled with. Despite only blitzing on less than a quarter of defensive snaps, they generated pressure on more than 50% of Purdy's dropbacks. Now, Mike McDaniel, no stranger to the way the 49ers do business. He comes from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. Dolphins use motion at an extremely high rate, much like the 49ers. So you have to imagine when they're scheming offensively to attack this Ravens defense, they're using what worked and didn't work last week for San Francisco to try and improvise and make modified tweaks and adjustments in that particular regard. The Ravens are dealing with an injury that you're going to want to monitor in that defensive backfield. Kyle Hamilton, amongst the team leaders in interceptions, passes defended, tackles for loss. He had the strained MCL. He's a warrior. He battled back. I would expect him to be out there, but you still want to pay attention to it on a short week. In steps the Dolphins offense, Payne, that could be without one of its key cogs of its own. Jalen Waddle dealing with a bit of an ankle injury. He was a DMP on practice on Wednesday. I know Devin Achane and Tyreek Hill were, but the talk out of Dolphins camp, very different status updates for what it means for Waddle's availability than some of the other key cogs to be out there. When we look at Tua, this is a quarterback who sometimes has wilted when he's under pressure. This year, the numbers don't necessarily suggest yet, but the Ravens are a different animal. Dolphins offense against the Ravens defense. Is there a path for success in hostile territory for the Fins to be able to create that balance?
The Ravens are a different animal than the Dolphins. You are correct. I actually like where you...
One lives in the water, one flies in the air. Look at that. I was quite the zoology student back in the day.
I actually like where you started the conversation, and it's a bit, I wouldn't even call it narrative-y, but it's very difficult to implement a price, right? Like what's the value of it? But your hope is for sure that Mike McDaniel is able to really decipher what transpired last week with how Mike Macdonald defended his old 49ers offense. Mike McDaniel, right, knows the 49ers offense inside and out. He's spent his entire life with Kyle Shanahan. So when he's breaking down that film, he knows, like, hey, this is what Shanahan was thinking. This is what he was trying to do. And he also got a glimpse of how Mike Macdonald is going to implement some of those things defensively, because a lot of the concepts are somewhat similar. So I think Miami is certainly going to try to fire up the ground game. If you had to pinpoint the most vulnerable area of the Ravens defense, it's certainly stopping the run. It's about middle of the pack, 18th in rushing success rate allowed. The 49ers actually had great success running it last week, 47% success rate, average positive 0.14 EPA per rush. It was the 4th best mark of the week. So that part of the Ravens defense wasn't great. You're going to see Mostert and A-Chain get fired up here. Now, you mentioned the Waddle situation. It's not looking great. I would say when you think about a high ankle sprain, you immediately gravitate towards that being the most severe. I kind of get the vibe it's just more location, and it's not as necessarily severe as it's being displayed. I don't know if that means he tries to go. If he doesn't, it probably means more A-Chain out of the backfield, right? With those high motion rates, you're going to try to get Patrick Queen out of position. I think what is interesting here, though, from the Baltimore perspective, if Kyle Hamilton's out, that's a big chess piece to lose. But Mike Macdonald has been basically a wizard with some of his coverages, and he makes quarterbacks think. And that's what he did with Brock Purdy last week. He took away that first read, right? Made him kind of pat the ball, second guess, do some things pre-snap where, hey, it looks like this, it's disguised. And so when I think about that, where Tua excels, Tua's a quarterback that loves throwing with anticipation. We talk about this all the time, and that can lead to some ugly-looking interceptions because he throws with so much anticipation. But when he's forced to hold the ball, when he's forced to pat it a little bit, you mentioned some of those pressure metrics, he tends to panic. Even this season, that's where 7 of his 10 interceptions have come when he's held on to the ball for 2.5 seconds or more. When Tua releases the ball in under 2.5 seconds, he's graded out the number 1 quarterback in the NFL. Mike McDaniel is cognizant that the ball's got to get out of Tua's hands quickly to negate the fact that the Dolphins' O-line has just been decimated by injury. And so I think that is where the Dolphins' success comes from, is firing up the ground game. If you can't get the ground game going, then it becomes certainly a little bit more difficult of a proposition if Waddle's out, right? So I think that's the fear a little bit here. And so to me, again, this comes with some variance, because if Baltimore can stop the run, if they can get a little bit of pressure, like, this has the potential to look ugly from that perspective as well. And again, this is kind of the second part of why ultimately you may see some under money enter the market here, as squirrely as that could be late, You think about the offenses, right? You think about Lamar winning MVP, and you think about, Mike McDaniel's offense, and you immediately look at like a 47. Even if you are directionally right, it's you could be in a situation where you're not feeling so comfortable late, especially if one of these teams has to chase.
Oh, there's a way this game ends 23-20, and there's a way this game goes flying over the total, like the last time these two teams did business, where it was the Baltimore Ravens squandering a 3-touchdown lead against the Miami Dolphins. The last thing, and it's a question for you that I have on this game, Payne, will Talia Tagovailoa still, a member of the Maryland football team, be in attendance here, or is he shopping for apartments somewhere in Coral Gables, much closer to the Dolphins' home base?
Well, two things. The first is you mentioned, yes, it was an absolute shootout. When they played each other, it was last season, correct? But two of those, both defenses really, when you think about it.
And we had the first half under in that game and felt like we got a raw deal for the way that thing exploded midway through the second quarter with a fluke play here, fluke play there, and it just got loose for the final 3.
We did. You're right. That's a good memory. But you think about those two defenses then, they're vastly different now in terms of style and approach, right? Both defenses last year, pretty blitz heavy. A lot of like press man coverage, not a lot of different looks in the secondary, and it's the complete opposite with Vic Fangio and Mike Macdonald this season. So a little bit of a differing defensive look if you're immediately gravitating towards last year and seeing the game, have a gazillion points scored and thinking that that's exactly what's going to happen this game as well. To your other question there, apparently he's going to try and skirt the rules and get an extra year of eligibility, even though he played a 5th game his freshman season. And obviously, we'll see what the NCAA decides to do. They apparently changed their rule after having guys like Tez Walker and Darrell Jackson, miss large stretches of this season or all of the season in general. So those rules are changing. But, listen, Miami's got some money.
Bag of cash goes a long way in the current landscape.
It certainly does. It certainly does. So that would be the least shocking thing ever, especially, if the NFL wants to have Big Tua and Baby Tua in the same city.
Hey, look, hat tip to that family. He could be on the Van Wilder plan and play college football for 37 years. He still won't be as old as Casey Thompson when he arrives at his 37th school, wherever he lands to finish out his college eligibility this coming football season.
You distracted me, so we got the 3rd and 16, 4th and 4 touchdown. Right? Is that okay?
Yeah, the variance monster. Come on, you didn't think a full half of variance was going to work in favor of the good guys, did you?
I did not. Okay, lead us to the next one.
Late game in the Pacific Northwest, a showdown for two teams who are hoping to get themselves into their respective conferences postseason between the Steelers and the Seahawks. It is the Pittsburgh Steelers, a 3.5-point road underdog at Lumen Field to take on Seattle. Total on the game 41. The Seahawks, suddenly after a midseason losing streak, firmly in control of their own destiny, win out, and they're in the postseason. The Steelers need to win out and get some help for them to be playing meaningful football well into calendar year 2024. And Payne, we saw the Seahawks offense get their starting quarterback in the fold last week in Geno Smith, but it looked erratic at best. For the better part of 3 quarters, they did mount a couple of scoring drives in the fourth, were able to escape Nashville with a narrow 20-17 victory. Meanwhile, the Steelers fans, they're ready to build a bronze statue of Mason Rudolph in front of a Crozier Field, given what he did to make this offense have a pulse. George Pickens off the milk carton onto the stat sheet with a pair of touchdown passes and nearly 200 yards receiving. And you've also seen a backfield split again. Najee Harris taking advantage of some of the power components, but Jaylen Warren out there for roughly 60% of the snaps. These two teams defensively, it has historically been their DNA. The Steelers right now, I'm not sure most Steeler fans can name their starting linebackers or safety tandem, given how many players they've gone through there. Meanwhile, for the Seahawks, you can look at their past D numbers. They look great the last 2 weeks because no one has had a throw on them. They have been an absolute sieve with teams' ability to run the football right down their throat, allowing 136 rushing yards in each of the last 5 games, 31st in the league over the last 3 games, 25th from a yards per attempt standpoint, and 32nd over the last 3 games, giving up 5.6 yards per carry. That has to be music to Mike Tomlin's ears, Payne, but when you look at this matchup, do you think it's the Steelers offense against the Seahawks defense that'll decide it, or the Seahawks offense playing in the friendly confines against an overrated Steelers stop?
Ooh, shots fired.
She knows they stink. It's okay.
This is one of the more difficult games, right? Like, you need Geno to start to really return to form, and I think his play has been so up and down, and it's been tough to price the Seahawks because of that. The week-to-week variance has been pretty evident. You kind of want to give Geno a pass. You give him the benefit of the doubt. You're not going to perform overly well. Oh, my God. You're not going to perform overly well.
Now I see why we don't do podcasts when there are games on TV.
I usually don't watch them, but we're trying to keep the bowl streak alive. This one's a little more meaningful than the actual game in and of itself. You think about Geno, right, and like what he's done, and he's playing with an injury to his throwing arm, and you're getting defensive fronts like the 49ers and the Cowboys and the Eagles. Like, you're not going to look perfect in those spots. And then last week, it's like you get the matchup that's great, but the spot is just terrible, right? Traveling across the country on a short week after you upset the Eagles on Monday Night Football. And Geno kind of navigated his way through that Titans game, but I expected a better against a horrific Tennessee secondary. Finally got it fired up in the fourth quarter. It was just a little bit, too late for those that were pretty sharp betting the over there.
And a game that boiled down, quite frankly, to the number. I mean, if you laid the best of it at 2.5, you cashed. If you took the best of it at 3.5, falls right there on the all-important field goal.
Exactly. And I think with this game is sure, like it'll be on Geno. But there's also been some issues in recent weeks with Pittsburgh's run defense, right? I mean, the Colts ran wild. Zeke turned back the clock. Arizona was able to have success on the ground. So you'd like some balance and help for Geno. But I think this game, has to be on him. The Seahawks, if you think about the players they have, the areas of the field that you want to attack are pretty interesting. Now, I know the Steelers' coverage schemes in general have given Geno trouble in the past. Not specifically the Steelers, but the type of coverages that the Steelers employ, the type of man defense that they kind of break out and use. But I would think there's going to be real opportunity here for DK. I mean, Metcalf has been the primary focus against heavy man coverage defenses. This is also the type of game where you go out and you get a slot receiver in the draft like Smith and Jigba, and you triple down effectively with 3+ receivers, and he's just so quick to get off the line. The Steelers are dead last in the NFL in yards per target allowed to slot receivers. And, again, I know some of the things Pittsburgh does has given Geno trouble, but you look at some of the quarterbacks that the Steelers defense has faced, and this is kind of why your comment was a little not so slanderous at the top. Right? I mean, they played a rookie quarterback recently in DTR. It's Jake Browning twice. It's Bailey Zappi on a short week. It's Gardner Minshew. It's Kyler Murray in his third game back after a year-long layoff. And in general, I think everyone knows we believe Kyler Murray to be less than what everyone else perceives him to be. And so that's who Pittsburgh's defense has faced the last 6 games. We've seen some nibbles at 3.5 on the Steelers from a couple of pros. We know the narrative about Tomlin not having a losing season, But I'm just kind of paying close attention to the injury report here. I could see a situation where this gets down to 3, the injury situation flows in the favor of the Seahawks, and suddenly, you're finding value on Seattle at a depressed price. But this is inherently like a very difficult game. I know we talked off air. It sounds like Witherspoon is at least trending in the right direction, but that would be a huge get back for Seattle defensively. They just need to figure out a way to get their run defense back to where it was the first third of the season when they were just a stalwart and no one could run on them, because that would certainly go a long way to being able to allocate more bodies in the box, more bodies in coverage rather, if you're able to stop the run with your front 6. Are you hearing anything
it's been a real
quarterback for Pittsburgh?
Judging by some of the comments I've read, I'm still going to operate under the assumption that it's Mason Rudolph. I didn't love some of the comments and quotes from your franchise quarterback and Kenny Pickett. I know he's been short with the media, but that's kind of been a trend for everybody on that Steelers offense when they keep getting asked questions. Kenny has said he wants to play. He said it's up to the medical staff to try and clear him. Now, Tomlin wasn't as definitive in terms of Mason Rudolph being their quarterback, but this isn't a coach that loves to lie to the media and basically give you some of that smoke and mirrors like others that go, hey, we want you to prepare for 2 quarterbacks. So I think it's going to be Mason Rudolph in this spot. I would be really surprised if it was Kenny Pickett. Even after Kenny's comments, when asked if he's learning anything watching from the sidelines, he said absolutely not.
What did you make of Mason Rudolph last week?
I think Mason Rudolph is a gunslinger. And I think when you look at what he's capable of doing, he can hit the big play, but from a down-to-down efficiency standpoint, he's not going to wow you by any stretch of the imagination. And you look at what he was able to put forth, 17 of 27 on the surface, multiple touchdown passes and nearly 300 yards passing, which is nothing to shake a stick at for the Steelers offense and some of their limitations. But take away that big run after the catch for George Pickens on the 86-yarder and a couple of other deep balls. He didn't wow you with anything he could do consistently. But I think against this Seahawks defense, you can hunt the big play. We saw it from DTR and that Browns offense when they played up in Seattle previously. But I do think consistently sustaining drives in hostile territory, if Witherspoon is back for this Seahawks defense, is going to be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, that's kind of what I saw and what you see in the metrics. It looks better than it was. And you have to think about that Bengals defense, right? I mean, the secondary struggled all season. And I'm sure they had a little bit more of a game plan allocated to stop in the ground game because that's what Pittsburgh wants to do. And so Rudolph hit a couple home runs to Pickens there. But this just feels like a much, much tougher spot for him, even if metrically the Seahawks defense has been downtrending, stopping the run, and the secondary has had some question marks throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's a Bengals defense. Look, we knew that was going to have to do some things differently, schematically, to stop the run, to your point, with no DJ Reader in the middle. And the Bengals did one thing exceptionally well last Saturday against the Steelers. They didn't allow Pat Freiermuth to go for 100-plus yards. They figured they'd let another Steelers receiver beat them. And as a result, they played man coverage on the outside. Chidobe Awuzie had no chance for the athleticism and speed of Pickens. And, of course, the Steelers got out to that early lead and were able to coast to a victory. The final game, not only of NFL Week 17, but of 2023 in the National Football League, will take place Sunday night from U.S. Bank Stadium, Payne. Showdown, an elimination game of sorts for two teams hoping to get a little help with a win and find themselves in the NFC wildcard picture. The Vikings, a 2-point favorite against the Green Bay Packers. Total on this game, 46. And these two teams will look very different than what we saw the first time around. Well, the Packers were looking for an offensive identity. They were only able to muster 10 points in a 24-10 loss. The Vikings started that game with Kirk Cousins. He was unable to finish, as we came to find out after, a torn Achilles in that spot. But Green Bay has since identified Jordan Love as their quarterback of the future. He's definitely shown a little bit more promise. We're not sure who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Vikings. During Wednesday's walkthrough, both Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall took reps with the first team. The Vikings injury report, an absolute mash unit. Too many names to rattle off here without keeping this podcast under 90 minutes. Green Bay, meanwhile, on the other side, unique situation brewing there. Top cover corner Jair Alexander suspended for the game because he decided he was going to name himself an honorary captain and go out for the coin toss, claiming that Charlotte was his home city. I don't actually believe Jair was born in Charlotte, so it makes things even more interesting in and of itself. And when asked about what his language meant when it came to deferring the opening kickoff, he goes, yeah, defense. That meant the same thing. So interesting story to follow there. But Payne, when we look at Minnesota defensively, I mean, Brian Flores has done more with less. Gets a little bit more difficult without DJ Waddle, but Danielle Hunter has been as good as advertised, leading the league in tackles for losses. We know they can bring pressure as frequently as any team in the league, but they're also not afraid to drop 8 into coverage. Green Bay defensively, well, that secondary has been an absolute disaster. Signs point to Darnell Savage returning to hope to solidify that group, but it should still be an opportunity for that Vikings receiving core to go nuts. So many different ways to go, and I don't think this game warrants a full deep dive on both sides of the ball. Which matchup are you most fascinated to see unfold, knowing that we, of course, do have a little bit of a season-long vested interest in trying to get the Packers an outright win for ourselves and for our listeners who listen to the preview podcast?
I think the way Green Bay's defense is playing and some of those injuries to the key cogs at the second and third level, which have basically allowed Baker Mayfield to look like an MVP and Bryce Young to look like the most competent he has all season in successive weeks, that you got to really, oh my goodness, that you really have to focus on Green Bay's offense here, because they're probably going to have to score some points. I can't envision a ton of stops being had by this Packers defense. That'll go a long way if Jordan Addison is out. It helps that Hawkinson is down, and I think that's why you're seeing a little bit of a battle on this total where, opened really short at 43.5 on Christmas Eve, and it just got buried, and then you have people kind of chasing that number at 46, and we got to like 47.5, and then suddenly everyone's like, okay, let's...
Packers totals, to your point, by the way, have been real interesting over the last couple weeks because they took substantial under money that I didn't quite understand 2 weeks ago against Tampa, given those injuries. And last week, that thing got absolutely boat raced over the total. It opened as low as 36.5, and I think it closed at 40 in some spots, even against a much maligned Carolina offense.
And so, listen, you mentioned us and our listeners having a vested interest in the Packers over 7.5 wins. It would have been nice if they didn't stub their toe on Monday Night Football against the Giants, but certainly it would be even nicer if this didn't come down to Week 18. But I think this comes down to Jordan Love. I really do. He's quietly coming on. Huge confidence builder in that performance against the Lions on Thanksgiving. And you're starting to see what he's doing, right? It's kind of helped catapult his confidence down the stretch since Week 11. Jordan Love, number 2. Among 32 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. I think the first thing you look at in a spot like this, how does Jordan Love fare against the blitz, right? Because we know that's what Brian Flores typically wants to do, and that's actually when Jordan Love has been at his best. It's one thing, though, that Brian Flores identified the first time they played, and so Flores smartly dropped his blitz rate all the way down to 36%. I think that's the cat and mouse game here. I'm going to be interested to see how Flores defends this week because Byron Murphy didn't practice on Wednesday. He missed last week with the hamstring. Mekhi Blackmon, the Vikings ace corner, number 1 grade defender, is dealing with a shoulder injury that's in a hardness. He could barely lift his arm last week, had to leave the Lions game early. Flores didn't want to dial up the blitz as often, against Love last time, but you also are thinking about leaving your secondary a little bit out to dry if there's a couple guys out and you're allowing Love to have a bunch of time. You mentioned DJ Wonnum. Tore his quad. He's the Vikings' second best pass rusher. 38 pressures, 9 sacks are gone. Offenses can now focus on Danielle Hunter a little bit more with help, right? Tight end help, whether it's a running back chipping. So can Minnesota get natural pressure with that? And if they can't, then does Flores have to dial up a little bit more blitz? So I think that is really going to be very interesting here. At the same time, the Vikings secondary is dealing with some of those injuries. We saw Jaden Reed return to practice for the Packers. Would be a huge get back. Let's monitor that toe injury today. It was only a light practice on Wednesday. If he can round into a full on Thursday, that's a good sign.
Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson both did miss, though.
Yeah, and they have, right? Christian Watson's been out since week 13. You'd obviously love to have him out there. But you're looking at the Vikings specific to Jaden Reed have struggled defending slot receivers, so that could be a nice matchup for Reed to take full advantage of if he's healthy. Aaron Jones looks fully healthy. 22 touches last week. The Vikings have... Oh, my goodness. The Vikings...
You know what this reminds me of, by the way, is...
Unreal.
This reminds me of people that watch The Wizard of Oz, I think is the movie, and they try and sync it up to Pink Floyd, Hole in the Wall. I think people are going to listen to this podcast and try and sync it up to exactly when we start it and match play-by-play by the inflection in your voice, given what's going on.
So for everyone listening, we had the first half under in SMU Boston College, under 24.5. And it's
I have a partial position at a much worse number, so.
I mean, that's the worst price I got. There's 25.5 out there, but it's pretty irrelevant. Anyways, I mean, just the last 3 possessions have been absolutely stupid. It was 3-0 with 14 minutes to go in the second quarter, and the variance button's getting absolutely spammed right now. So going back to Aaron Jones, fully healthy, had 22 touches last week. You look at how the Vikings are struggling to defend running back passes. That could be an option, right, if some of those other receivers do not return. But this game, to me, very much on Jordan Love, continuing that caliber of play since week 11. In terms of the market, I think there's going to be a little bit of a battle here. We've seen some initial Packers money. I think if you are saying to yourself, hey, boy, I don't really want to ride that Packers roller coaster of having to win a game that's close to a pick 'em, fire up the teaser and get them above the 3 and the 7. And then I believe there is a different opinion as well in that, if a Vikings money line became cheap enough, there's going to be a different faction that has that on their minds as well. Just, again, going back to last week and saying, hey, that was kind of a little bit of a fraudulent loss to the Lions. What is this line if you go on and win? Or what is this line if you go on and cover? So I think there's some differing viewpoints on this game. And again, specific to the total. We just said this, as we're recording this right now, live in time, one shot goes to the key of 47. The other one comes off the 46.5 down to 46, right? I mean, this is legitimately, feels like a battle on the side and total among some bettors and groups with respect.
One of those weeks where there's battles pretty much ever on the board. I know our listeners are sick and tired of us saying it, but it's a broken record to earlier in the season, and some of the results help explain exactly how things are going in terms of respected opinions on both sides. One last thing I want to ask you about this game. When you look at the handicap, and we're not sure at the time of recording who the Vikings starting quarterback is going to be, do you make any adjustments for side or total on Jaren Hall versus Nick Mullins, or do the two basically use the right to wash the left?
I don't. I mean, listen, We've kind of joked around about Nick Mullins' arm strength, and we've been, at least last week, we wanted some, just to put it out there, like, hey, yes, we're backing Minnesota. That comes with backing Nick Mullins. We understand the arm strength is not there, and it certainly bit us in a couple of situations. But in terms of other options as being a best fit for the Vikings if they truly want to win a football game, it's Nick Mullins. if you just look at EPA plus completion percentage over expectation since he's gotten back in to the starting role, and even in some mop-up duty, number 2. So like the down-to-down stuff has been very good. It's just the head-scratching turnovers that he's got to remove from his game equation. And so I don't know what the mindset is of the Vikings. Last week was kind of their all-in moment. Now that you're 7-8, I mean, you're still kind of in the playoff hunt. What is their playoff percentage? Do you know? Odds to make the playoffs off the top of your
I don't
head?
know the playoff percentage off the top of my head, but they need help because Seattle controls. Yeah, Seattle controls their own destiny. If one of these teams loses, they're eliminated. They can get themselves in with a little bit of help. So it's a cluttered mess.
Let me look.
When you look at all the different
their season isn't over
there,
to where you would be handing the
reins to Jaren Hall, going, let's see what the kid has for the next
I
2
don't
games.
think he's in this very moment Sunday night primetime division game. Maybe I'm wrong, right? It's a 1-game sample. You could go out there and look
Hey,
look
maybe
like
the
Lamar
Vikings are in the
Jackson.
market for Russ. Maybe they're in the market for Russ Wilson now.
So I mean, my insinuation would be if it's Jaren Hall, the Packers this game's gonna move closer to a pick. Maybe even go off
That's
Packers
fair.
1.
That is a fair assumption to make, and one of the storylines that we're going to be following up until kickoff Sunday at US Bank Stadium, one of the more electric atmospheres, and we'll see if one of these NFC North teams can keep their playoff hopes on life support in a game of this magnitude. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, it's the time of the program where we get to offer up our final best bet of the year, and want to give you the floor for the most actionable element that you see in front of us.
So just for full disclosure, absolutely hate this card. As Todd alluded to, there's battles all over the place. It kind of takes me back to 5-6 weeks ago when the market was just an absolute mess, and no shock, right? When everyone's kind of in agreement that's really sharp and has market influence, you start to see the results of the last 4 or 5 weeks. But one game that we have bet, I wouldn't say it's gotten away from us because, believe it or not, and sure, I'm going to say this thing's going to fall 21, but it hasn't completely gotten away from us in value despite the perception of the move and the numbers. And let's go with the Rams-Giants first half over 21.5. I think when you just look at this matchup, the Giants' run defense has been quite susceptible. Kyron Williams is what has really got that Rams offense clicking on another level. The Giants certainly play their defense with a lot of variance. They're going to send some blitzes. They're going to try to pressure the Rams, and we know Stafford's been substantially worse when pressured. However, I think there's the receivers there to have him get the ball out of his hands a little bit quicker. We really think, Tyrod Taylor is a massive upgrade over Tommy DeVito. Our thoughts on DeVito have been well known for the last 3 or 4 weeks, so we're not one of those tandems on a podcast coming out here and just telling you.
Fun story, not an NFL starting quarterback.
Right. I mean, and that's been our perception. But a lot of times, you start to follow the tea leaves, right? And someone will say something one week, and the story changes completely the next week just to make a case for a bet. And that's been our stance for, I'm not a Tommy DeVito guy, never have been. And so I think Tyrod Taylor is a massive upgrade, completely familiar with Daboll's system. I think the one reservation, you potentially had was like some of the things the Giants do schematically have given, some troubles to Stafford in the past. But as we're recording this right now, you're starting to get some confirmation, right? Rams have gone from 4.5 to 5 to 5.5, now out to a secondary key number here in 6. So let's go Rams-Giants first half over 21.5. As we record this, the weather is looking very good in MetLife Stadium for, what will be, is it a January game? I almost slipped up. Is that going to be January by the time?
December 31st.
Okay, so still a December game. Yeah, weather's looking, knock on wood, very good, where you wouldn't have some of those fears about a West Coast dome team who I think kind of lessened some of those fears with what they did in the elements against Baltimore a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, look, I mean, they went out there and they put up a crooked number. They played with their hair on fire in that game, and let's hope that the Rams can do it. I mean, they're still another team in control of its own playoff destiny. So while it is a difficult travel spot going across the country, if Mother Nature smiles kindly upon them, this Rams team has been a fun watch over the last couple weeks. And you know what? Some of their totals, for anybody that's watched Rams games, been suppressed because they're not executing in the green zone and red zone. They start to do that, this thing goes flying over, not just first half, but full game as well. And that's what you'd want. You want the Giants pushing to play catch-up against Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, and Kyron
I'm going to put
Williams.
you on the hot seat
All
here.
right,
You mentioned the Rams, and this is one we talked 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? And in all markets, you kind of have to adapt and adjust. And, you know, we tell you when we win, we tell you when we lose. You know, we had the Rams under 7.5 wins. It looked great when I believe they were 3-6, about to be 3-6, down double digits at home, about to be 3-7. And then
stupid Seahawks game changed the entire
season. They caught fire, gained some confidence, and, you know, like, say this all the time, this is a market, right? If you bought a stock 6 weeks ago and you suddenly hate it, like, you don't have to completely keep it, you know? But in saying that, like, I'm going to put you on the fire. The Rams are a team that I don't think anybody in the NFC wants to face, you know, wild card weekend. Where are you assessing the Rams in the pantheon of the NFC right now? And I'll tell you where we have them.
When I look at the NFC, and I'll inevitably leave teams out, I'm not telling people something that they don't already know. The 49ers are not just the best team in the NFC. They're the best team in the league. I know Ravens fans out there going, we just beat them on their home field. The 49ers should still be a favorite on a neutral field there. So I'm making the 49ers number one. I have the Dallas Cowboys still as the second best team in the NFC there. And I think at this point, you can throw a blanket over the teams named the Philadelphia Eagles, Detroit Lions, Los Angeles Rams, and the Bucs probably a half tick below that particular
there
group.
you go. Yeah, we have basically the Rams in Detroit pick them on a neutral, which would...
That's a game. Come on. If the NFL scheduling gods can give us something, can we get the drama, the storylines, and the intrigue of a Matthew Stafford return home to Detroit when Detroit finally wins the division? Because it would be the perfect... 360 to get a circle. And you know what's even better about that? I'm not sure if you caught this pettiness, Payne. So the Lions congratulated Calvin Johnson when he was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. He didn't respond to their tweet until the Lions had clinched their first division title on Sunday.
That is pretty funny. That would be fun. You spoke it into existence. Now I want to see, you know, Detroit and the Rams square off. That would actually be a really...
See it, believe it, and achieve it. I think that'd be a hell of a lot more fun than the Rams going to Philadelphia or something like that.
Also, I mean, you got to love the hook, baby. Got to love the hook.
Yeah.
We're in.
I got most of my position at good numbers.
Only 3 touchdowns the final 3 possessions.
Apparently should have waited till game day. This thing steamed like they knew the final score, and for those folks that bet it 2 minutes before kickoff, could have gone under 24.5 again.
Well, in and out. I don't feel great about the
I wouldn't want to have the full game under right now. Let's put it that way.
I want under 47 had that been a number. Okay. All right, did we give the best bet out already? Okay.
Yeah, I think you gave out the best bet.
I think so too.
I mean, I'm glad that you 3.5 hours of sleep that you're operating on over there, like you're 26 all over again. Do you want to offer up your annual New Year's PSA to all of our younger listeners?
Don't be a stupid idiot. Yeah.
There we go. See, that's all it takes.
Especially now. It's different when we were kids. We didn't have the Uber. No. Now all of a sudden.
And trying to find a cab when you were in a house party sometimes in the Chicago suburbs was an absolute disaster.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, pay for a nice car service. Treat the lady friend. And if you don't do that, yeah, definitely the Uber or the Lyft, whatever you kids do these days.
I actually am going out for New Year's Eve for the first time.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The guy dresses up for Halloween. You think he's not going out on New Year's?
I mean, look, apparently I've been roped into a semi-formal event. I mean, I'll be tapping out at 12:30. Not sure how much drinking I'll be doing, but I'll be ready to go for the lousy bowl games that we have on New Year's Day up until the real one kicks off that all the Bet the Board listeners will be paying attention to in the Rose Bowl.
Semi-formal, so you can't roll into the New Year's party in the chicken costume.
I mean, that'd be great. I did that for Halloween in Southern California. Don't remember how I got home. All I know is I got back to that hotel room and I had to use hotel-issue towels as lily pads to step over some of the carnage that left results and an impact from the night that I'll never remember.
Okay, Frogger. I like it. So, first of all, you're married now. You could roll into the chicken costume. What is she going to say?
No, I think I'd have to deal with that guilt for a long time. She might go, no, you're embarrassing us and the family. So it's a higher level and a higher standard, Payne, that I have to adhere to at this point in my life.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you'll be out partying.
I do miss it. It's all relative.
It's all relative. You're the quietest go out guy. All right, let's wrap this up. But in
cocktails.
general, Todd's the one guy in the
The-
world that says he doesn't go out ever, and then you start to piece things together. He's always out. I mean, he's always out of the cave.
Hold on.
We got
I go out Friday nights during
Tuesday
football
meetings
season.
at Starbucks, Wednesday meetings at Starbucks. Now that
All right,
we have a
Tuesday
common
meetings
friend,
at Starbucks are not meetings. It's where I go to try and zone in so I can prepare to deal with you and Brad to talk college football every Wednesday.
I was told by a common friend and a source we will not name. Said he invited you over for a poker game. Nowhere you weren't heard from. And then I find through the grapevine another source like, hey, Todd's out. Todd's out and partying. This was a week ago.
Todd's out. Yeah, Todd's out and partying. I love how this rumor mill. I know how the rumor mill gets started. I'm asleep most nights when I can by 10 o'clock because I have to make sure I have all my wits to be able to go toe to toe with you on these fine programs. I'll have 2 drinks. I'll be responsible, and I'll be responding to your text at about 6:30 in the morning on New Year's Day as we try and dissect these bowl games.
Beautiful.
But again, from everybody around Bet the Board,
close us out here.
All right, I'll close it out. I want to wish everybody that's been with us, whether it's the first episode for Bet the Board or you've been with us since the first episode way back, a very happy and healthy new year. Be smart, make good choices, and with a first half over ticket in hand between the Rams and Giants, we'll see you at the window for the final time in 2023.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.